Morning. Today's daf is Gittin daf nun bet. We are at the Mishnah at the very top of daf nun bet. We are in the middle of discussing Mishnayos discussing issues that involve um, uh, um, the concept of tikkun ha'olam. Things that are for the betterment of society. And so too here we have we're going to see indirectly, we're not going to see, it's not going to be mentioned explicitly in the Mishnah, but but the issues where the rule is based on the idea that we want to try and improve society is going to be driving the rationale for the rules that we're going to be having. So let's take a look. So again, the very beginning, Mishnah on the top of Nunbet Amud Aleph. So Yisomim, Yisam who Eitzel Balabai. That when it comes to the guardianship of let's take a look at Rashi. Rashi really will help us out. So here we will do a few Rashis. La'asos al-piv, basically that la'asos al-piv, plonis mana lehen apotropos lo me'avihin v'lo me'beis-din. That basically that they decide that these orphans decide that they're going to rely on this particular person as their guardian, take care of him, and to take care of them, and the person was not appointed neither by the father nor by the court. So even in that situation, even in such an informal arrangement, we're going to say that that the person who the orphans are relying on has the responsibilities and the obligations and the rights associated with being an operator. And so what is that? So Oshim, and then what's the other kind of category? Oshamina lehen aviyan b'apotropos. Or if their father appoints for them an apotropos, well then chayav la'aser perosein. They have an obligation. Because of their role in protecting the orphans, they have an obligation tied taking chumas and meiser from the produce that they have. So that way the children don't accidentally eat teva. Apotropos sheminahu aviyat yisomim. But when it comes to, and then that's point number one. Point number two. Now, point number two is the Tanakama says apotropos sheminahu aviyat yisomim. When it comes to the apotropos that was appointed by the father, yishava. As Rashi says, when the orphans grow up and they become adults, yishavalahen, the apotropos, the guardian, should swear to them that he doesn't own anything that belongs to them, that he has nothing that they're supposed to have, and that way the orphans will know that the guardian took a good care of them. However, minuhu Beis-Din lo yishva. If the Beis-Din appointed him, we don't have to swear, and we will explain the rationale for this opinion, and when we get to the Gemara. Abba Shaul says chiluf hadvar, reverse it. So when it comes to the person who was appointed by the father, that person does not need to swear. But when it comes to the person who was appointed by Beis-Din, that person does need to swear. Okay, so and lo yishava, right? So the point is that he doesn't. Okay, so that actually we in the Gemara. Okay, so now the Gemara says we've got a big problem because we just said in our Mishnah that a guardian must take meiser on behalf of the orphans, but uraminu, we've got a contradiction. We've got a brayso that teaches atem. The pasuk in Bamidbar Perak Yudchet pasuk of that a couple weeks ago we read that atem v'lo shtafin. We say that the pasuk says, "Came tarimu gam atem trumas Hashem mikol ma'asrosechem," that you should take everything, the trumas that are required from all of your tithes. Asher tikume eis b'nei Yisrael nesatam imenu es trumas Hashem la'aron hakohen, and the truma needs to be given to the kohen. So the point is, as we begin, as we're now at the top Mishnah at the top of Nunbet Amud Aleph, the point is that while our is that because the verse specifically says you, it's highlighting that you have to take truma from your own stuff. But when you have a partner, take a look at Rashi. First Rashi on the Gemara, third line in the widest lines of the Rashi at the top of the daf on the bed of Aleph. Ein yachol l'trom al chelik chaveiro shalom midato. You are not allowed to take truma to separate the ties from the produce that belongs to your partner. So if you have a partnership with somebody and you have assigned certain pieces of the production to your partner, you're not allowed to take truma on their piece. They have to do it themselves. Now, obviously, they can point you as an agent, but you can't just do it on your own. Atem below arisin. Similarly, you and not sharecroppers. So again, Rashi helps us out. Lo arisin al chelko shel bal habayit. The not with respect, of course, the sharecropper should take trumas and meisers with respect to their own piece of their own share in the produce. But when it comes to the share that the owner of the property has, they are not supposed, the landlord has, they're not supposed to take that person's truma and meiser. And of course, the final one is the one that's relevant to our case, atem below apotropin. So you and not guardians. And so as a result, when we had in our Mishnah that the guardians should take trumas and meiser, that seems to directly contradict this brisa. And the brisa concludes, below hatorem es she'eno shalo. And of course, you also are not allowed to take truma from anything that doesn't belong to you. And Rashi notes two possible explanations. Hach seifa, this last item, this is the last line in the widest line at the top of Rashi, where we say this ends to this brisa, haima duration klomer. It's the explanation for the first three categories. So when it comes to the partners and the sharecropper and the guardian, the reason that they can't take trumas and meisters from the things that don't belong to them is because they don't belong to them. Kolomar atem mima'et hatorem she'enu shelo. You are trying to take out the truma that don't belong to you. Bahani kulo she'enu shelo. In all categories, we're talking about things that don't belong to you. Oh, and then Rashi gives an alternative explanation. Nami zu ve'ein sarach lomar zu. That in each case we're getting from from a harder case to an easy. So with the partners. So, you don't have, you didn't, there's a greater connection between the two partners. They're equal with one another. So maybe you might say that in that situation, when they separate, you owned the piece, you owned 50% of everything, and now you separated and determined what the other guy was going to get. You, in some ways, had some historical connection to it. So maybe that's why you would not be able to do it. That's why you would be able to do it. So even in that situation, and then Aris, you never had that direct connection. You weren't parallel, but at least you were the one who grew the stuff. And then apotropin, all right, but at least you have control over it. And then well, then you have no connection to it whatsoever. So of course, that situation. So those are two different explanations of Rashi. Bottom line is that we have this contradiction. Mishnah said that a guardian does take truma and meiser, and our Mishnah says it does not. So Amar Rav Chisda gives us the answer: Lo kasha kan lahachil kan lahaniach. The question is are you doing it? Are you feeding the orphans, or are you saving money for the orphans? Are you putting the money aside into the like a bank? So if you're saving, if you're putting it in directly into their mouth, well then of course you need to take it. You can't, although there is no clear prohibition of feeding minors things that are not kosher, when you have a responsibility associated with them, so then you should make sure not to feed them anything that's not kosher. But when you're just putting aside the produce and it can be taken care of when they grow up, well, then you should not do it yourself. You should allow them to make the financial decisions for themselves. Okay, so that is the explanation. And now we're going to teach a long brisa that will begin by highlighting this particular point, but then continue to cover many, many other rules that are associated with it. V'hatanya, we've got a brisa, ha'apotropin tormin umasrin la'achil v'lo la'haniach. Along these lines, even though Vahatanya is often a question here. It's not. The point is that the apotropin, the administrators, the guardians, they can take truma and meiser when it comes to feeding the orphans, but not when it comes to things that are put in storage. Okay, so what are the other rules that this brisa tells? So you can see we've got a nice long list of them on the screen, and so let's go through them. So number one, umochrin lahen behema avodim ushvachos batim sadus ukramim lahachiel lo lahaniach. So they're allowed to sell assets, and we have a number of different kinds of assets, whether it's animals or slaves, male slaves or female slaves, houses, fields, vineyards. All of that can be sold, even though these are things that would ordinarily be used to bring a profit and to help support. You can sell them in order to feed the orphans from the proceeds, but you cannot sell them in order to just put the money aside, because again, these are things that could produce profits. Umokran lahem and peiros, yenos, shmanos, shmanim, uslatos, and you can sell fruits and wines and oils and flour. Again, lahachil avolo lo lahaniach. Again, these are now marketable assets, but they're storable marketable assets. And so as a result, again, you're allowed to sell it in order to produce fruit, but not just to put aside money. There's an obligation, new obligation. There's an obligation, an educational obligation that guardians have to get them a lulav. The arava, of course, is not the arava that goes in the lulav. The lulav refers to all the four arba minim, the lulav, the hadassim, the aravos, and the esrog. But the arava refers to the aravot that would be walked around with in the Beit HaMikdash all 7 days of the Sukkot, and which we walk around with on Hoshana Rabbah. The sukkah, the tzitzis, all of these things the guardian should get for the orphans. B'chol davar sheyesh lo kitzva, things that have some kind of limit, meaning that that there's a cap to the price, meaning it's an object that you know exactly what the cost will be. La tuye shofar, but that comes to include a shofar. So belokin lahem, in addition, they should buy for them Sefer Torah, tefillin, mezuzahs. It's interesting, right? So the first items are things that are assumed that because of the agricultural society, that the guardian will be able to do it on his own. There's no purchasing associated with it. It's that he can actually make it, because you go out into the wild and you pick the lulav. You go out into the wild, you pick the willow branch. You go out to the lulav and you build your sukkah. You take the elements of the sukkah. So and similarly, you put tzitzis on your oh look, Stan's here. And you put tzitzis on your garment. The local but when it comes to the following, you have to buy it for them. Sefer Torah, tefillin, mezuzahs, v'kol davar sheyesh lo kitzva. And again, when it comes to things that have some kind of price limit, then you have to buy them. And what does that come to include? La Tuya Megillah. It comes to include Megillas Esther, which also needs to be written on klaf, and as a result, it's good to have for them to have a copy. All right, but ain poskin alayin stucca. But what don't you do? What is the thing that doesn't have a limit? You don't put aside tzedakah for them. The ain podin alayin esashvuyan, and you're not going to use their assets to redeem captives. The low kol davar she'ein lo kitzva, because each of those items effectively have no limit. Because once you get started, you don't know where it's going to stop. As Rashi puts it, tzedakah. Take a look at Rashi 3, 6, 9, 10 or 11 lines down. Tzedakah ein la kitzva. It doesn't have a limit. Deha b'chol shasa, at every time. Kaimi aniyim and nimtzu nichnasim kalim, that aniyim could come in front of them, and so as a result, it'll end up resulting that you'll find that their assets will be depleted, and so we don't want that to happen, and so therefore we don't allow the guardian to use their assets to give tzedakah or to redeem captives. And another category is that we won't have them do comfort of mourners. Now, obviously, when we go to visit mourners and comfort them, there is no cost associated with that. So what are we talking about with respect to the cost? So the most likely aspect is that there is an obligation of the community to provide a first meal associated with the comfort. There's a special su'udah that is done for them. And so it could be that it's referring to those costs, maybe also possibly the costs associated with burial. Bottom line is those costs do not come from assets of orphans. Okay, continuing on in the Baraisa, ve'ein apotropin rishon ladun, and the guardians can't litigate on behalf of the orphans. Lachov v'lizkot, whether in order to make them obligated to something or to cause them to gain something. B'nichsa yisomim, when it involves the assets of the orphans. Now the Gemara pauses in the middle of the Brisa to ask, Lizchos amai, why can't they cause them to gain something? Ella lachov al manas lizchos. No, the point is not that they couldn't absolutely win in court, but if in fact if there's an obligation that results from their attempting to create a merit, b'nichsa yisomim, when it comes to the orphan's property, we're not going to allow that to happen. So what does that mean? Rashi explains, Ella, again, it's about 15 lines down in the narrow lines. Hakikamer, this is what we're trying to say. Ein rishon ledov lechov al manas l'skos. They don't have permission to go to court and end up in a situation where they are obligated, even though they try to win. So, and the point being, if that in fact it was judged, if they went to court in order to win, but in the end, and in the end they became obligated, we're not going to let the orphans lose. So basically, if you go to court, you can't lose. So it's a little bit odd. Go ahead.
If they can be countersued, then you can't sue. Is that the idea?
No, even if they've been countersued, that court case cannot be dealt with until they grow up and become adults, is effectively what it's saying.
Oh, it's like they're stopped from
estoppel, exactly, while they're minors. If the minors have no adult to take care of them other than a guardian, then that's the situation. It seems like that's the way we would follow. That nobody
can't bring the suit in the first place if there's a chance that.
There's a debate, obviously in the Rishonim, exactly how this plays out. But the note here notes that the Sma rules that since any unfavorable judgment against the orphans is nullified, so that the opposing party can never be successful, it's inappropriate for an administrator to participate voluntarily in any litigation. So the point is that basically, since the orphans effectively can't lose, we're always going to say, you know what? Obviously, if you want to, if some other litigant somehow wants to, maybe they want to limit the damages and pay the damages already. But given the fact that there is no interest charges, because we don't charge interest in Judaism, so there's not going to be any delay in the orphans receiving something, is not going to produce any additional costs for the person who has to pay. So as a result, there's effectively no incentive for anybody to try and rush a litigation when they know that they have no opportunity of winning completely. Okay, so so now we go back. So that was the pause on how we understand what that last line about not being obligated and not being able to win. The point is really, we're effectively not able to win because we're not going to have any kind of litigation whatsoever because they can't lose. All right. A guardian can't adjust assets based on their own convenience. So they can't sell what's far away and redeem and basically use those funds to purchase assets that are closer. And they can't, on their own opinion, say, well, these are bad assets. I want to sell them and I'm going to get good assets. My time, what's the reason? You would think that maybe they should be able to. The Dilma Mishtadfin, maybe that the field that they end up buying won't actually be so good. It'll end up being wind damage. And so as a result, we don't want to have the guardian to end up being responsible for some loss for the orphans. Go ahead.
A fiduciary on steroids.
Absolutely, 100%. It is exactly a fiduciary on steroids. Thank you for making me think of that, because I got to send an email to somebody who's writing a book about how different aspects of the Gemara translate into today's world. So ve'ein apotropin rishayin limkor sados v'likach avadim, and they're not able to sell fields and buy slaves. So there we can understand, right? If you sell a field's not going to die, slave's going to die. So maybe you would want to avoid that. But the first opinion, the Tanakh says you can sell slaves and you can purchase fields. However, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer af lo limkor avadim v'likach sados. You can't even sell slaves and purchase fields. My timer, what's the reason? Dilma lo mashayfan. Maybe it's not going to be still. And here Rashi explains lo yeho mishukatos etzlo, that it won't have quiet title. You may have done all the research you could, but it may turn out that somebody else claims that land. And Shema Yatza Alav Aror. Maybe somebody will complain that the land doesn't belong to you. And so as a result, you'll end up, again, the point is we don't want you to take the assets that they end up with are the assets that they have. We don't want you to take unnecessary risks associated with those assets. We don't want you to, and it's more than that. We don't want you to change the risks associated with those assets. They can't free slaves. Of course, you would say that they can't free slaves because that would be giving something away. But they can sell the slave to somebody else, and then somebody else could free them. Rebbe Omer, Omer Ani, he says, I say, Avhu nosing dmei atzmo v'yotze. Actually, you would be allowed to free the slave if the slave commits to owing the estate the value of the slave. Because it's effectively like selling the slave to himself. So that would be fine. Now, and at the end of the evaluation, there's a requirement to provide an accounting, some kind of an accounting to show where all the money went and what all was spent. From Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, no, there's no need for a special accounting. All right, Enos and apotrop and noshin v'avadim ktanim. So who can become a guardian? We don't generally appoint women, slaves, or minors as guardians. Now we'll see that that's not an absolute rule, and so Rashi explains Noshim because ain darkan let's say l'avo l'troch. They don't generally have the practice of going out to business. So
I'm sorry, guardianship is still well in existence today.
Absolutely, 100%. That's why I've chosen to use this word as opposed to the word here, an administrator, because an administrator seems not quite accurate, not quite fully encompassing. The ain and why not avadim? Avadim, Rashi explains, because ain ne'emanim, they're not believable. They're not believed. And kitanim ain b'nei das. And when it comes to minors, well, they don't have sufficient knowledge and understanding. And we will see that the Gemara, in some of the cases, we're going to be having a number of stories, and in some of the stories, the administrators will be women. But if, in fact, the father of the orphans, when he was alive, appointed these people, he has the right to do so. Okay, so that finishes our long brisa, and now we're ready to tell a series of 5 stories. The second of the stories, you'll see, has nothing to do with guardians, but it talks about it builds on the first story that involves Rebbe Meir, and so that's why it's told. Hahud apotropos tahava b'shivvusei to Rebbe Meir. There was a guardian that was in Rebbe Meir's neighborhood. Tahava kamazabin arasa b'zavin abde, that he was selling a land and buying slaves. V'lo shav ke Rebbe Meir, and Rebbe Meir said, you can't do that. So then the Hashem came to the Rebbe Meir in a dream and said, Ani laharos v'ata livnos. What are you doing here, Rebbe Meir? I'm trying to destroy the assets of this family. Don't know why, but Hashem was saying that Hashem wanted to destroy the assets of the family. And now you are preventing that. You're enabling the assets to be built up by requiring that the land be kept. So afilu haki lo ashkach. So, but of course, Rebbe Meir does not pay attention to the dream because Amar, he said, divrei chalomos lo malin v'lo maridim. We don't pay attention to dreams. We don't make a decision to raise something up, to lower something. We're not going to allow that to affect our analysis. Okay, so that was effort number one.
Don't make investment decisions based on dreams.
That's exactly what it says. That's exactly that's exactly what this is teaching us. And it's interesting, of course, because there are other stories. There's a famous story, of course, where the dream comes to somebody, and it's ironic because of the ramifications. But the dream comes to somebody and says that the father says, "I left money in this place, and it's all considered Meiser Sheni." And the guy goes to this place and he finds the money, and then he asks the question, "Well, do I have to treat it as Meiser Sheni? Because that was what the rest of the dream was right. Do I have?" And the answer is no. We don't pay attention to dreams. So even though the dream was accurate, we're not going to pay attention to it. All right, so now another story with Rebbe Meir protecting people. So Hanu Beitrei Igori Behu Satan. So here, this is a nice Daf Yomi coincidence. There were two people that the Satan regularly got to fight with one another. The Kol Bei Shimshei Havu Kaminsu Bahadi Adadi. That every Friday evening they would fight one another. So Iklu Rebbe Meir Lahasam. Rebbe Meir happened to be visiting there. Akvinu Tulasa. He's Bei Shimshei. He stayed there for three Beina Shmashos of Friday night evening, Ad Avid Lahu Shlama, until they were able to make peace, because he would stop the Satan from encouraging them to bicker. And people sort of like use this halacha that they say that basically, that we should all try to have, especially, that we all understand the pressures of Friday evening and trying to make shas. We should understand the pressures of Friday evening, and we should try to be a little bit more understanding. So Shamei de Kamer, as a result of him being successful in this regard, Rabbi Meir heard the following statement: Void apake Rabbi Meir lahahu gavra mibeise. Woe that Rabbi Meir has taken out this person from his house. Now, who's the person? Presumably, it's referring to the Satan. That here, the Satan was being successful in getting people to sort of fight one another and lose their civility and their credit for being a nice person. And now he was able to return them to a positive relationship. So we all sort of learn from this lesson and try to be as patient as possible, and recognize that sometimes when we have that feeling of impatience, it's actually the Satan getting our goat. So okay, Hahu Apotropos. Next, now back to the guardian stories. Hahu Apotropos to have a bishop who say to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. So there was a guardian in the neighborhood of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. To have a kamazab and arav izab and Torah. He was selling land and buying oxen. Below Amar Levi below Midi. And Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi didn't tell him anything. Sabarlak Rabbi Yossi, and that's because Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi thought like Rabbi Yossi. The Tanya, we have a brisa. Rabbi Yossi miyamai loka risi la ishti ulashori shori. I don't call my wife because that suggests like either possessive or some aspect of a limitation of who she is. And I don't call my ox, but rather I recognize Ela ishti besi. My wife is my entire house. She's my entire world. She's everything. Ulushori sadai. And my shore, my ox, it's not just my ox. Without my ox, I can't even operate on my field. So it is effectively my field. So what we're seeing from Rabbi Yossi's statement, and this is the way Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi was concluding, was that, listen, if you need assets in order to operate your other assets, you are allowed to sell property in order to be able to effectively operate in that regard. Okay, so Hanu Yasme de have story number 4. Hanu Yasme de havu samichi gabe hahisavta. So here's one where the guardian is a woman, and they did it voluntarily. There were some, as the explanation here, the translation here, there were orphans who relied on a particular elderly woman, meaning that they voluntarily decided, she wasn't appointed by the father, but they decided that they wanted her to take care of the assets. Havalahu Torsa, and they had a cow, Shakla Vizabina Halayhu, and she sold it for them. Asukrovim Lakameh de Rav Nachman. So the relatives came to Rav Nachman and said, Amrule, Maya Vidta Dezamna, what gave her the right to sell it? So Amr Lahu, Rav Nachman said, Yisomim Shesamku Eitzel Balabayas Tanan. We learned in our Mishnah that when the orphans rely on an adult who's managing a house to take care of their affairs, they're allowed to do so. This, by the way, this highlights that the Balabayas in our Mishnah, even though that's usually a male term, can be viewed as a term, a gender-neutral term, and is actually including women as well. And so the relatives complained further. Well, 1 second, the price of cows went up after she sold it. She shouldn't have the right to do a bad deal for the orphans. Well, tough luck. It went up in value in the possession of the buyer. Well, 1 second, but the buyer didn't yet pay for it. Amar lahu. So Rav Nachman said to them, well, you should have led with that, because that's the winning argument. Im Kain, if that's true, Hainu Durav Chanilai Bar Idi Amar Shmuel. Well, then you have a great statement that will support and help you, because Rav Chanilai Bar Idi said in the name of Shmuel, the Amar Rav Chanilai Bar Idi Amar Shmuel, Nichta Yisomim Harei Hen Kehektish, that when it comes to property of orphans, it's treated like hektish. What does that mean, that it's treated like hektish? Lo mikne ela bakaspa. Until the entire transaction is completed, not only do you need the person to take possession of it, but you also need the money to change hands. Only then is the transaction completed. And so as a result, here in this situation, the money hasn't changed hands. So even though the buyer has taken the cow, and the cow has now increased in value, because the person hasn't paid yet, the obligation to pay now goes up. And so as a result, the woman who sold it will receive, on behalf of the orphans, the higher price of the cow currently. Okay, now another story number 5, and here we're going to deal with wasting assets, or again, a story again with changing prices and changing values. So chamrei de rabana ukva yasma mashchuha. So the wine that belonged to Rabbana Ukva, who was an orphan, had mashicha done to it, meaning that the buyers have taken possession of it. But arba, and they bought it for 4 for everyone, every barrel, every jug, whatever. Yaker become shita, and now it's 6. Everyone is supposed to be 6. So Asla Kameh to Rav Nachman. So they came in front of Rav Nachman. Amar lahu. So he said to them, to Rav Chanilai Bar Idi, to Amar Rav Chanilai Bar Idi, Amar Shmuel. We have this again, statement of Rav Chanilai in the name of Shmuel. Nixa Yisomim Harei Hen Kehektish V'lo Mikni El Bakaspa. Again, same basic thing. So if the purchase price had not been paid, so then the higher price would need to be paid by the purchaser of the wine. All right. And now we're going to have this rule dealt with explicitly. And we're going to actually go through all the different possibilities, because there are 2 aspects to a transaction. One, right? And if we think about it, it makes total sense. One, if I'm selling you an object, you have to take the object and you have to give me money. Those are the 2 aspects of a transaction. And so what happens when only one of them is done? Now, in an ordinary case, we focus on, in an ordinary situation, we focus only on Mashicha. Whenever the Mashicha happens, whenever the taking of the possession, if I sell you my computer, it's whenever you lift up the computer or you drag it towards you, if it's something that's too heavy, that is when you take possession, and that finalizes the transaction. There's no further change in price, nothing else. We say, in general, money doesn't do it. Money alone doesn't do it, is what we mean. If you give me the money, we both have the ability to back out of the transaction, even though you've given me the money. Now, I believe in Masech Bava Metzia, we'll talk about how you're a bad guy if you back out of the transaction in that situation. But you have the right to, because we want possession to be a key element of the transaction. And the reason is, and we'll see this in a moment, because if it isn't a key element of the transaction, what might happen? If you pay me the money, I now am storing your stuff, and now I could say there was a fire, it all burnt up. And so as a result, to avoid that litigation about a failure to deliver, we end up saying that a deal is not a deal until you take possession of the object. And that is the method that the rabbis came up with to deal with it.
It's saying like possession
is 9/10 of the law. Exactly. So that is an element that you can see within this aspect. So now we're going to break it down and say, in every situation, whether the orphans are the buyers or the sellers, and whether the orphans whether the transaction has just had you can even see a 2x2 box. On one side, it's orphan sellers and one's orphan buyers. On the top, you have the money has changed hand, but there's been no Mashicha, and Mashicha but no money. So those are the four possibilities, and now we're going to go through all of them. So let's go through it. Mashak peri miyatme, if they took possession, but they didn't pay the actual money, and now it went up in value. That's the rule. The Rav Chananai Bar Idi says that if it goes up in value and the buyer hasn't paid the orphans, tough luck on the buyer. Even though they've taken possession, they have to pay the extra money. Zul, if the price goes down, lo yehi koach hedyot chamor mehektish. Well, we're not going to give the buyer greater right with respect to hektish and orphans than they have in an ordinary case. And in an ordinary case, once you've had Mashiach, the deal is done. And so even if the price goes down, tough luck, the buyer has to pay the original higher price. Now, on the other hand, if the guardian of the orphans take possession for the orphans, if the price goes up, again, we're not going to make them worse off than we are going to make an ordinary person. And an ordinary person, if I buy something from you and I take possession of it, and then the price goes up, it's tough luck to you. I get to pay you the original price. So to the orphans. Zul, what happened if the price goes down? Savar mina, people used to think, the Hainu de Rav Chanilai Bar Idi. Maybe we should apply Rabbi Chanai Bar Idi. So Amar Lahu Rav Shisha braid the Rav Idi, and we're going to see that Rav Shisha is going to come in a number of times now, two more this time and two more times, so in total 3 times, and he's going to say hara hiluditu. That actually, you might have thought that would be the right answer. That again, the orphans took possession, and now the price went down. Okay, so you might think, well, let's let the orphans pay the new lower price. After all, they haven't paid the money. But he says that's actually going to be bad for them, because the zimnin dimitztarchi leperi, there will be times that they need the fruit. For example, they need the fruit to eat. Veleka, and they won't be able to get it. To yahiv lahu adiyah ve'lezuze, and they won't, because they'll condition giving them the fruit on the orphans giving money, and maybe the orphans will be what's the word when you don't have cash handy? They'll be, cash poor. They will have the liquidity issues, and they won't be able to get their hands on it. And so as a result, they will suffer as a result. So therefore, in fact, we're going to treat orphans just as we treat others. And even though they've taken possession of the object and the price is now going down, they still have to pay the original higher price. Now we've done two. Now we go to Yahave Yasme Zuze Aperi. So now the orphans have given the money for the fruit, but they haven't taken possession. Zul, it went down in value. So lo yehe koach hedyot chamor min hektish. So again, we're not going to punish the orphans more than we would punish any regular person. If I buy something from you and I've only given you the money, and now the price of the object goes down, I can get a refund of the price difference. So Iyakar, if the price goes up, however, Savar Mina Hainu de Rav Chanilai Bar Idi. Again, everybody thought, well, let's apply Rav Chanilai Bar Idi and allow the orphans to take advantage of the fact that they already paid the money, and so let them take advantage of the lower price that they paid and get to keep the transaction. So Amar Lahu Rav Shisha Braid the Rav Idi, no, who he ladidhu. That won't work out so well for them as we turn to Nunbet Amudbet. To Asul Memer Lahu Nisrafu Chechem Baaliyah. We're worried that if that happens, if they end up paying money and it's considered for them like they had a transaction, what will happen if the price goes up? Well, if the price goes up, the seller will say to them, listen, I'm sorry, but your stuff burned. And it's hamotzi mechavero olav araya. I already have your money. I already and your stuff is may be burned or may not be burned. But it's tough luck on you. You're going to have to try and prove to me that your stuff still exists somewhere. So as a result, we're worried that that's going to happen. And of course, again, that was the reason, as I explained at the beginning, that we don't ordinarily allow cash to be the thing that determines the effectiveness of a sale. So what happens if the orphans gave money for so now second. I'm sorry. So now the orphans are selling. What happens if the purchasers gave the orphans money, but they did not take possession? Again, iyaker, if it goes up in value, lo yekoch hedyot chamor mehektish, we're not going to make the orphans worse off than we would a regular person, and we're not going to make hektish worse off, and we're treating hektish and orphans similarly. And so as a result, even though the purchasers paid the lower original price, they're stuck and they have to pay the higher price. But however, Zul, if it goes down, Savar Mina Hainu de Rav Chanilai Bar Idi, maybe we should apply Rabbi Chanilai Bar Idi. And again, Amar Lahu Rav Shisha Braid the Rav Idi. No, that's going to be bad for them. Sometimes they'll have liquidity issues and they won't have fruit handy, but they need money in order to buy food. And no one is going to give them the money until they give the fruit associated with it. So as a result, that's going to be a problem. So we've gone through now the 4 different situations, and that's the story so only in one situation, only when they have sold something and the buyer has taken the possession of it, and then the price goes up, do we say that they are going to get the higher price? Okay. Now, 2 more stories. Amar of Ashi, Ana Rav Kahana Chasminan Ashtara Deime de Zeira Yasma. That when it came to the mother of Zeira, who was an orphan, so Rav Kahana and Rav Ashi, signed a shtar that allowed the Mizabna Ara de Tharga, that allowed the mom to sell land that belonged to Zeira to pay the head tax below Achrazta, without an announcement. Now, as an aside, we'll note here that, and Rashi puts it nicely, Achrazta, it's the 3rd narrow line in Rashi. Shemach reason there was an announcement, Shloshim Yom, 30 days ahead of time, Karka Ploni Yotzelimkar, that this particular land will be sold off. There will be an auction based in the court. And so as a result, that would maximize the chance that you get the best price. And so we're going to, when you have a last second need like this, we are going to allow a sale even without an announcement and a 30-day notice period. To Amri Nahardai, because the people, those who were learning in Nahardai would say, Lekarga, Lemizone, Vilikvura, Mizabninan, below Achrasta. For when it comes to a head tax, the purchasing of food, or for burial expenses, we will allow the sale of items without any kind of proclamation. Okay. Now a second story. This story deals with a failure on behalf of a guardian. Amram Sabah, there was a fellow named Amram who was a dyer who, he would dye garments, which is not a very high-paying job. It's a very dirty and disgusting job. But he was appointed apatropa de Yatmehava, and he was the guardian of orphans. Asukrovim lekamei Rav Nachman. So the relatives came before Rav Nachman. Amrulai, they said, Kalavish umakase miyatme. He's dressing up using the orphan's money. Amrlahu, no, ki hechi delish tamanim lilei. He's doing that in order for him to be heard. As Rashi puts, but this is a need of the orphans. This is 9 lines down in the Rashi. If he's going to do business on their behalf, he should look like an important person. And the dyer would have blue hands. They would not look ordinarily all that dressed up nicely. So as a result, that's why he needed to buy nice clothing. So okay, so now they complained again, and he's eating and drinking from the funds that belong to the orphans. Well, the low amor, and he's not below amud, excuse me, and he's not somebody who you'd estimate as having money in order to do that. So amor mitzia ashka. Well, 1 second, you don't have to say that. Maybe he found something. Maybe maybe he won the lottery. The point is that you can't come with an allegation of misuse without evidence. The evidence of him having assets, those assets could come from another source. That's not a good enough proof. But how kamasted? Well, 1 second, he's doing deals that are causing the assets to depreciate. Oh, Amar Lahu, Rav Nachman said to them, well then, Aisuli Sahade demafsid. Bring me witnesses that say that he's damaging the property. So Isal Klitne, and I'll remove him. The Amar Rav Huna Chavrin Dmishmei de Rav, because we have another statement, Rav Huna in the name of Rav, Apotropos Demafsid Misal Kinan. Like if you have an apotropos who's losing the money, wasting away the funds of the orphans, we will remove him. De Itmar Apotropa Demafsid, because it was said about an administrator who damaged. Rav Huna Amar Rav Misal Kinan. Like we're going to remove him. Devei Rabbi Shila Amre Lo Misal Kinan. Like but Rabbi Shila's yeshiva said no, we don't remove him. The Hilchasam Misal Kinan. Like but the rule is we do remove him, and that in fact is the case. We do remove them. Okay.
This is only in a case of negligence or something. Like if he made a bad investment, that happens, right? I mean.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I mean, the question is that's a very good question.
Your financial advisor doesn't always make money for you. I mean,
correct.
But whether or not he's losing money for you or gaining money for me.
No, but I'm not sure you're right here, because remember, in this case, we've been told that he's not allowed to engage in any risk-changing behavior, and so as a result, if he does engage in a risk-changing behavior, that in itself puts him at risk of being removed. And so if he engages in a risk-changing behavior and that doesn't pan out, then you have the right to remove him because he wasn't really supposed to engage in the risk-changing behavior in the first place. Stan is making from a fiduciary point, that if you call him a true fiduciary, then there's actually a limitation on his ability to actually lose money.
And he's told this before he enters into the.
Yeah, he knows the rules are up front. So it's not, you're absolutely right that on some level, if there's no responsibility associated with it, Meaning the question is what are the circumstances of the loss of money? If the loss of money is just the value of the cows that were in the flock of the deceased when he died went down in value because the entire flock went down in value. Of course, I don't think we're talking about that kind of loss. But if the guy sells the flock in order to buy a field, or sells this field in order to buy some other field, and engages in some kind of transaction, if the transaction doesn't work, then we at least have the right to remove him. I'm not sure that we would necessarily remove him in every circumstance, but I think the court would have the right.
I mean, sometimes it's not a risky thing, but the prices are going up, the prices are going down here. I mean, nobody knows, so
Yeah, I totally hear you. Again, the clear instruction from that long brisa that we learned is that we don't want we don't want the guardians to change the risk profile that was effectively created. It's actually interesting to think about it the way I just phrased it. We don't the father had some kind of risk profile that he wanted for the assets that he left to the rest of his family, and we don't want to change that while the children are minors. That is the children's responsibility to change. And if you go ahead and do something that changes the risk profile and it doesn't work out, well, again, I don't know that we will necessarily remove you, but at least the court has the right to remove you, is the way I would interpret this Gemara. Again, I haven't looked into the actual halachas, but all right, let's take a look. We have a couple more pieces. I want to get to the Mishnah. So apotropos sheminohu avi yisomim yishava. We said that when it comes to at the end of the system, there's an obligation to make for the guardian to swear that he doesn't have anything. And the Tanakama said you swear when it's the father who appointed him, and you don't swear when it's the court that appointed him. And Abba Shaul said it was the reverse. So my time, what's the reason of the Tanakama? Well, look, if the administrator, if the guardian didn't get some benefit from the father, lo havale apotropos, it's a pain to be an apotropos. So he's doing him a favor, which probably means that the father did other things for this guardian. And mishum shvua lo asi le'imnuye. And so as a result, if we actually add to his obligations the obligation to make an oath, that is not a big obligation. And given how much the father has presumably already done for the guardian, we're going to impose on him the oath. Minu based in lo yeshiva. But if the court appointed the guy, then we're not going to have him swear. Why? Milsa ba'almahu da'avid lebeidina. This is coming from out of left field for this guy. The iramis alei shvua. If we're also going to put on him an oath, asi le'imnuye, he may refuse to agree to do it. But Abba Shaul says it's the exact reverse. And why? Omer chilav advarim. Fix it, switch it up. My time, I mean, you were based in Yeshava. Why do we say that if the court appoints him, we're going to have him swear? Because listen, what do you get to say if the court appointed you? If the court appointed you, you get to say, hey, I was appointed by a court. I'm really honest and trustworthy. The report is going to go out about the guy that he's very trustworthy. Because the court is relying on him. Well, if you're going to get that kind of good cred in the public's eye, you won't hesitate to make an oath. Whereas we know, but when it comes to the father of the orphans, we're not going to make him swear. They were just friends. They did little things for each other. If we put on him some kind of oath, he may stop from doing it. So Amar Rav Chanan Bar Ami, Amar Shmuel, Abba Shaul, that the halacha is like Abba Shaul. All right. However, we're going to learn now two brisas that a brisa and a story that seem to contradict this. Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Omer Zeb Yeshiva. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, who we ordinarily say the halacha always follows, says that we have to swear in both cases. The halacha kidvarav, and the halacha is like him. So Tani Rav Tachlifa, and we have another brisa that Rav Tachlifa taught Bar Ma'arava, who is from the west, from Israel, Kamei de Rabbi Abahu, who taught it in front of Rabbi Abahu, Apatros Shaminahu, Avi Yisomim Yishava, that the father appointed or guardian needs to swear, Mimnesha, who knows his succor, because he receives payment. Well, 1 second. Amar Lay, Rabbi Abahu said, I to kaba v'kalyat lay. Are you going to come measure the amount of the payment? Of course, the administrator, the guardian, isn't going to get any payment. Ela ema mimnesha who can no say succor. It's as if he's paid. Meaning, the point is that he has value. There is value to the guy associated with it. Now, Tosos here notes that if you take a look at the Tosos halacha k'abashol, Omer Rabbeinu Tam dekain halacha, that in fact the halacha is like abashol, that you swear when when the court appoints him, and you don't swear when the father appoints him, and the revisit, and that is despite the fact that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says something different, and even though ordinarily the halacha is always like Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, but here that statement of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is not in a Mishnah, it's just in a Talmudic statement, and as a result, and given the fact that in other Gemaras it seems that the halacha is not like that, we will not follow that particular statement of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. All right, so now where does that leave us? That leaves us with the next Mishnah, where we introduce a very fascinating topic. The fascinating topic is, how do you deal with somebody who does damages where the damage is not apparent, such as I take your tahor produce, which you were going to maybe even use for Meiser Sheni or bring or whatever, and I make it tameh. Or I mix truma into your produce. I didn't realize that you had already taken the truma. I thought this was all one pile or whatever, and I put something in. I contaminated, exactly. Or I mix it up with the wine that belongs to non-Jews or whatever. If I do something like that, is that damage that I need? You can't tell. Looking at it, there's no difference. It's the same pile of wheat that it was before and then after. Is that something that is going to be problematic or not? Well, for that, you'll have to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. So we'll stay. I wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom and look forward to continuing our learning, God willing, tomorrow. So tomorrow will be probably before Mincha, and Ellie will cover it. You take a look at the WhatsApp to make sure on the time. Night is probably 7:10. I'll double check right now.